I will know to include you in our discussions or to ask you questions. So please make sure to turn on your camera. Okay, we will get started then. Claire, Emily, good to see you.
Good to see you
Hi.
too.
All right. Well, then just give me a second. Okay. So today we are going to start our second class and continue on our topic of having a meeting and being the facilitator of the meeting. Okay, so first, let's get into a little review of our homework. Okay, so for our homework assignment this week, I had all of you practice writing an opening for a meeting that you may have. There were 3 different scenarios that you were to write an open for each scenario. So we had our first scenario, which was that you're a CEO of a company and you must hold a meeting with other high-level managers to discuss internet access and whether employees should be restricted from certain internet access or from certain websites such as social media, YouTube, etc. Then we had a second option where we were going to talk about problem solving. It was a problem solving meeting where you were the principal of a high school that needed new science equipment and you had to figure out a way to pay for it. And third, we had an informative meeting. And this meeting was in the scenario that you are a restaurant who has recently reopened from being shut down for COVID. And so you need to have an informative meeting to tell your employees all the new procedures and safety measures that you will need to do to reopen. So those were the 3 scenarios, and everyone should have written a small short opening for each one of those. So just to start today's class, I would love for someone to share for just their open very quickly for maybe 1 or 2 of these scenarios. So, Claire, I know that you sent me a write-out of some of your openings. So would you mind sharing your opening for this first scenario?
Okay. My opening for the first scenario is since everyone is here, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of today's meeting is to talk about the restriction of internet access to certain websites in the workplace. To discuss this matter, I'd like to have your ideas.
Okay, so that was very good. So I sent you a couple of comments for that one, but you did a very good job. So does anyone want to say what they think Claire did well? So did anyone hear anything that they particularly liked that they think she did very well? Emily, what was something that you heard Claire when she did her opening for the decision making? What was something you heard that you liked or you thought she did well? Do we still have Emily? Oh, okay. Sarita, go ahead. I see that you raised your hand. Go ahead, Sarita.
Sorry, I made a mistake. I pressed the message um comment part wrongly. Sorry.
Okay, it was just a little bit hard to hear, but so I didn't quite catch everything that you said for what you liked about the presentation, but please do make sure to continue to participate. But I just couldn't hear you very well. Well, one thing I think that you did well, Claire, is you really had a good welcome to your meeting. So you said, looks like everyone's here. Let's begin. welcome, hello everyone. And so you really had a very good message there. So I really liked that. Okay, so that was just an example. Thank you, Claire, for sharing yours, being the guinea pig to share first today. But we're going to have a lot more sharing, so get ready. So here we go. Okay, so that was our homework. Now keep your homework handy and available because we will reference that homework throughout the presentation today. And when we get to the end, when we talk about next week's homework, we'll also use those same scenarios. So now let's get into our open. So last week, we began our meeting discussion by talking about some important parts to an effective meeting. And one of those things that we really want to have that really starts us off in a good way is having a good open. And so for our open, oh, let me just zoom right in. Wrong square. There we go. So what should you include in the opening of your meeting? So here, I've included 6 different headings that we will go through today of things that you should include in an opening of a meeting. So they range from the welcome and intro, which I just commented that Claire did very well with, who's attending, objectives, an agenda, timing, and some of the ground rules. So that just gives us a preview of some of the things we'll talk about today. Okay, so let's get started. The very first thing that we want to do in the opening of our meeting is have a kickoff and welcome. And so, does anyone know what I mean by a kickoff? What does that mean, a kickoff to a meeting? What do you think, Emily?
Is the same as ice breaking.
It's very similar to ice breaking. Good guess there. It's very similar. Ice breaking is intended to get us all to know each other and make us feel comfortable. And that's sort of what a kickoff does. It makes us feel comfortable, but a kickoff a lot of times just calls people's attention to the meeting. So when Claire said, "Okay, it looks like everyone's here. Let's get started." That brings the audience's attention to the speaker and to the facilitator. So that's our kickoff. And now that may be a little bit different than a welcome because a welcome is more of that piece that's sort of the other side of ice breaking, where we are making people feel comfortable. A welcome is just to make sure people feel important. They feel that they're in the meeting for a reason, and we just want to. It's a pleasantry or part of our greeting. So, of course, here I say that we want to greet our audience. Consider the meeting's formality. So, through each element of what we should include in our open, we'll oftentimes discuss informal and formal ways that we can do this. And that's because meetings can have a wide range of formality. Sometimes we're having a meeting just with, let's say, other teachers in our school who teach a similar subject as us. So that might be more informal because we know them, we work with them, we probably eat lunch with them, and so we become close coworkers. And so that's more informal. But you also may have to do a meeting or present to maybe your boss or the manager. Maybe you are presenting in front of the whole school. Or maybe you're a member of an organization and you are presenting some of your thoughts or theories or a problem where you don't know the people who you're presenting to. So this would be an instance where you might want to use more formal language. Okay, so let's first look at the kickoff in the intro. So here's just a few examples that we have for ways that we can do an intro or kickoff in an informal and formal ways. So Claire, why don't you read for us the informal ways? Are you able to see those okay? Oh, I should, there's 1 second. Let me do this, and this will make it easier, I believe. One moment. Okay, now let's begin.
Uh, okay, for the informal first one, let's get started.
Hmm. And what
And
about the other two?
for the second one, if everyone is here, we can start the meeting.
Good.
And number 3 is thanks everyone for coming. Uh, let's kick things off.
Good. Good. So those are the more informal. So we're using just a little bit looser language. And so we have a little bit less of a formality there. And you already used some of these. You actually used a combination. Let's get started, and everyone is here. So you did a very good job, and you used some of those on an informal basis. Now, Emily, how about you read some of our formal ways that we can do a kickoff to a meeting, if that
Okay.
helps a little.
Oh, great. Perfect. Okay. FOMO. The first one, I would like to get started. The second one, I have called this meeting in order to discuss da da da. Number three, this meeting has been called with the aim of da da da.
Hmm. Good. And so you can see in this second example with the formal language, we're using words like I would like versus I want. And we're using things like I have called this meeting in order instead of I want to talk about. Or this meeting has been called with the aim, which is another word for with a goal or with the objective, instead of just saying, I need to tell you about so and so. And so you can tell, especially with the use of I would like and I have called, this language is usually indicative of a more formal setting. And so we want to use just that language instead when we're doing a more formal intro or kickoff. So now let's look at our welcome. So just some ways that we can welcome people to our meeting. Okay, so here let's look at some of these. So these are ways that we welcome the audience or welcome the group. So let's look at this language. How about Claire? We'll stick with the informal this time. How about you read those bullets for us?
The informal one?
Hmm.
Okay. It's a pleasure to welcome you. We are honored to have you. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to.
Okay. And just so you know, this is a little bit of a snafu or a mistake on my part. I switched my bullets. I put so the ones that you just read, Claire, are the more formal way of saying something or of welcoming people. So it's a pleasure to welcome you. We are honored to have you. This is language that we use in a more formal setting. So my apologies for the mix up on the headings there. Okay, so then Vicky, welcome. Would you mind reading it's under formal, but these are the informal ways that we could speak and
Oh,
welcome people.
okay. The first one is thanks for attending,
Hmm.
and it's great to have you. And can everyone join me in welcoming if you have
Yes.
a speaker?
Hmm. And so the third bullet on both the informal and formal are if you have a speaker. So sometimes when we have a meeting, we aren't the only person who will be speaking. Or maybe if we facilitate a meeting, we won't even be the main speaker. We might just be there to introduce whoever is going to speak in our meeting. And so those are two ways that we can welcome the speaker. If that main speaker, or if you have a second speaker who will be helping you out with the meeting, that's a way that we can welcome them. And also at the same time, we're kind of welcoming everyone to our meeting. Okay. So let's go ahead and move forward now. So that's welcome. That's the kickoff and welcome. Okay. So next, let's talk about who's attending. I won't spend much time here because who's attending is only necessary if it's not obvious. So these are going to typically be for your more formal meetings or meetings that have a large audience in them where everyone may not know each other. And so this is not something you'll do in every meeting. And the example I gave before, if you were having a meeting just between your co-teachers or people you work with, you may not need to say, hello, in this meeting we have each other. That won't be necessary. But a time when it may be necessary is, let's say that we're having a meeting where there are, let's say we're having a meeting for our school district or this many schools that are in our region. And so there are different school members in attendance from different places. This may be a time when we could say, and we could tell the rest of the group who's attending. So we might say, we have teachers here from Shenghua County, from junior high schools throughout the county. This lets the other people in the meeting know who else is in attendance. And it's also just something that's good to do just for common courtesy. Because if I am a person who might share in the meeting, or I might interact with the speaker by asking questions or giving comments, it's good for me to know who else is in the meeting so that I can tailor what I might say based on who's in the meeting. And so that's just a courtesy that we give to other people in the meeting so that they know who else is in attendance. So I won't spend too much time there. Now, the next section is very important. So if there is one section to opening a meeting that I would say always pay close attention to, it is our objectives. So we always want to state the objectives of our meeting somewhere in our open. So it's one of the most important parts. So it's the why are we here? What is the goal? And to any effective meeting, the people who are in attendance need to know exactly why they've been called to the meeting. And then also, what am I supposed to do? Am I here to absorb information and learn something, like maybe for an informative meeting? Am I here to solve a problem or to offer solutions? So people, that affects the way people listen to your meeting. So if I know that my purpose here is to offer you solutions or to come up with ideas to solve a problem, that's going to affect the way I listen to what you're saying. Because as I'm listening, I may think about, oh, here's a solution. Oh, I should be giving my feedback to what the speaker is saying. They want me to make a comment or they want me to make a suggestion. Whereas an informative meeting, maybe I'm just here to give you information and I don't really need your input back. I'm here just to deliver it. So that's why it's fair. That's one of the reasons why it's very important to always state our objectives. And so that goes to my third bullet there of it prepares your audience for what is expected of them. And that's going to vary. So we talked about our informative decision making. And then what about any other types of meeting? Like what our third example here in the third scenario that we had for our homework, of course, was, oh, well, I'm going back too far. Okay, so we'll just stick with this one. The objectives here. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So we have some ways that we talk about, or that we talk about our objectives and that we present our objectives in our opening of a meeting. So we, again, are going to keep the separation between informal and formal. Okay, so how about Emily, informal? Let's read that one.
I
Oh,
didn't turn on my microphone. Sorry.
that's okay.
Okay, the first one, there are 4 points for today. The second one, I want to get through the following 4 items on the agenda today. The third one, I call this meeting to get your views on blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how about Vicky? Could you go through our formal?
Okay, today our aim is to cover the following items. And as you will all see, the agenda has 4 main items to be covered today. And this meeting has been called to discuss the following items.
Good. Okay. And so here, if you notice on the objectives, there isn't a lot of difference between formal and informal, but we are using some of that same language from before. So we say here, today our aim is to cover. So we used aim previously in a formal context. And we also say this meeting has been called to discuss. So that's another way that we speak more formally about meetings, to call a meeting. Um, Also, take a look at the second bullet point for both formal and informal. Those bullet points discuss the agenda, which we're going to get to in our next piece of discussing an opening. But the agenda is something that really can help you support your objectives. So I know we mentioned agenda a couple of times in both the formal and informal setting here, but it's because an agenda really can help you to lay out your objectives of the meeting. Okay. I'm going to stop there for just one moment. Do we have any questions before we continue? Okay. All right. So now the agenda. Refer to your agenda. So, number one, except for the most basic informal meetings, most should always have an agenda. So we're going through this opening of a meeting, but even before we get to our meeting, the agenda is something that we should prepare before. And the agenda, very quickly, is just something that was going to lay out exactly what we're going to do in the meeting. Many times we'll put the different objectives that we're trying to accomplish. We may add the amount of time each we're going to discuss each objective. We may even include in our agenda some questions that we want our audience to answer. So, this is especially important for a meeting where you're trying to elicit some type of response from your audience, when you want them to give you feedback or to give you ideas. Sometimes it's helpful to include those questions or what you're looking for in the agenda and then send that agenda out before the meeting. So that's something that most of you probably do already for your meetings, but it's something that we want to make sure that we do. And also the agenda helps you keep you and your audience on track. So the agenda really, if we don't have one set up, even if we don't have a presentation to go through. So if we do a presentation for our meeting, that can help you stay on track because you're just going to go through each slide. But especially in times where we don't have a presentation, having an agenda will help keep you and the audience on track. It will help you manage the audience because it's easy to reference the agenda that, okay, for this particular item of discussion, we're going to take 10 minutes. So if that starts to go way over 10 minutes, then you can always reference the agenda and say, we're going to just go ahead and move on to our next topic since we only had about 10 minutes to cover this. And then they'll have that in front of them. They'll have that agenda and how long each topic will take. Okay, so let's just look at some examples very quickly, ways that we can reference our agenda. Because in the open, even though we're referencing the agenda, we're not going to read the entire agenda. The agenda is really something that people should read before the meeting or to have in front of them in the meeting, but you don't need to read your entire agenda as part of your open. It's just something we reference. So here for informal, I say, has everyone got a copy of the agenda? And for formal, we can say something like, I trust you have a copy. of the agenda. Okay. And so the second one, just a quick note. The second one is kind of meant as a statement, but you're hoping then that if people haven't got the agenda, they'll, raise their hand or they'll give an indication that they haven't received it. Okay. Next, we'll talk about timing very quickly. Timing is something that we only really need to reference for long meetings typically, or meetings where some attendees may be able to leave after parts of the meeting are finished. So, for example, if I'm having a company-wide or let's say a school-wide meeting of all of the department heads, and in my agenda, I say, well, first we're going to do the science department, then we're going to do the math department, followed by the English department. I may say, well, after the math department, if you're not in the math department, you're free to leave. And so these are things that we might discuss as timing issues in our open so that people know you can leave. And then that gives people the option. Because I think that many of us have probably been in a meeting where you're like, oh God, like nothing else here really pertains to me, but I guess I'll just sit here and listen to the rest. This could be a way to let people know that they can leave. So, some examples here. How about Claire? Informal. Excuse me.
Let's keep this message to 1 hour. Second one, today's meeting should only take an hour.
Okay, so this just gives you a way to tell people how long the meeting is supposed to be, and then we have the same sentences or the same point, but formally. So, Emily, how about you run through those?
I would like to keep the meeting to 1 hour. To respect everyone's time, this meeting will last for 6 minutes.
For 60
60 minutes,
minutes. hmm
sorry.
Okay, so again, we just see some of that more formal language. I would like, or to respect everyone's time. That's just a more formal way to say, I don't want to keep you longer than I have to. Okay. And lastly, ground rules. So, ground rules, and what I mean by these are just rules that we're going to have for the meeting. Basic rules that everyone should follow while we're in this meeting. And so, one of the major ground rules that we normally have is when you are allowed to ask questions. So here I say that usually we don't have to establish ground rules in meetings, especially informal meetings or meetings where most people know what's happening or the occasion is very informal. But again, the most important rules establish when you would like people to interact with the speaker or with the facilitator. And so some examples of what I mean are sometimes we want people to save their questions for the end of the presentation only. And so if we think about when this could be necessary, when is a time do you think that you might want people not to interrupt throughout the presentation with questions or issues that you would rather them save it for the end? What are some examples of that? And think about the types of meetings that we discussed. Decision making, informative. What kinds of situations might we only want questions at the end? What do you think, Vicky? What's a time when you may not want people to interrupt throughout the presentation?
Um, I would say maybe later at the end of the presentation, we have time to provide you to ask the questions.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we're telling people here. But is that something because I guess what I'm getting at too is that depending on what type of meeting you're having, you might want to choose one of these options or not. So for instance, if I'm having a brainstorming or problem solving meeting, this may be a time when I don't want people to wait until the end because the entire purpose of our meeting is for us to have an open dialogue, for us to discuss a problem, for us to ask questions, for us to challenge each other. So that may be a time where I actually want you to ask questions and I want you to participate throughout the entire meeting. Whereas maybe on the informative meeting, where the purpose of the meeting is just to give people information, this is probably a time where you would request questions to happen at the end of your meeting. Because what happens often is that people may ask a question that you're already going to answer when you get further along in your presentation. A lot of times, our minds may work faster than the presentation is going. And I know that I'm going to get to that anyways. And so I would rather not discuss it right now when I know I've already reserved time to discuss that later. And so that's a time when we might want to request that people ask questions at the end. But make sure that if you are going to ask people to do that, you have to be good about your timing of your meeting to allow there to be enough time at the end to address those questions. Because now people have been respectful and they've written down their questions or they've reserved them for later. And you want to make sure you give people an opportunity to actually ask those questions. And so, really quick, just a couple of examples here of ways that we can ask people either way. So we have the first questions at the end only. We could say something like, there will be time at the end of the presentation for questions, or please hold your questions until the end of each section. So there's two ways. We have it at the end of the section or at the end of the presentation. I've given kind of two options here. And then if you want questions throughout, just make sure you give people permission to do so. So feel free to ask questions throughout the meeting, or you could say, if you have questions at any point, feel free to ask. So we're giving people the permission to go ahead and ask those questions as they come up. Okay. All right. Any questions about establishing our rules? Or any other part, I guess, up until this point?
Uh, Excuse me. So
Yes.
as for the formal and informal questions, we can use half and half, right, in the meeting, or we can just choose the formal right or the informal right. Is the
Oh,
is is it necessary to choose informal, or we can both choose the both? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's a good question. So I think the answer is both yes and no. If you have a formal meeting, so a meeting with people that you know you should be using a high level of respect to, you probably won't switch to informal. You're going to stay informal because you don't want to be informal. Now, if you have an informal meeting, then if you say something the formal way or the informal way, it doesn't really matter because the formal is the least restrictive of the two. The informal is not as restrictive as formal. So for informal, you could use any option, but you just might sound more friendly or more natural to not be so formal with people you know. And that's just because we're already comfortable with each other. And so I may not have to be, all buttoned up and I would like to discuss. I could just be, okay, so we're here to talk about. So because we're in a less formal setting. Whereas if I were in a formal setting, I wouldn't want to go down to informal. I'm going to want to stay at that formal level the entire meeting. Does that make sense? Did that
Yes.
answer your question, I should say?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So let's move on to the practice section. And so what I want to do is, since each of you prepared an open for these scenarios that we had for homework, I want to give you just a few minutes to maybe make any changes or add or subtract or edit those openings with some of the things we learned today that we know should be included in our openings. And so I'll give everyone about 5 minutes to do that. Now, for the sake of time, I don't want you to edit every scenario since I know that everyone did all three. I'm going to just assign, so we'll just say Claire, how about number one? Emily, number two. And Vicky, you take scenario number three. And just take about 5 minutes to edit your opening, add some things that maybe you're missing, or edit the language. And then I want to take some time for each of you to just re-deliver, for Claire, re-deliver, or for the other two to actually deliver your openings. Okay? So I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that, and then we will go ahead and share those with the other participants. Okay? And if anyone wants to see any part of this, maybe for a refresher, or maybe you just want to look at some language, let me know, and I can always go to another section of what we have here. So if you're looking for something in particular or you need an example, just let me know.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Uh, should I write, can I choose formal or informal, or I need to do both things?
No, just choose one. So whichever one you prefer to do, just choose that one, and then you can make sure that your language is kind of consistent throughout. Especially if you choose formal, make sure that your language is consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm. And during this time, as usual, for those of you who have attended my classes before, if the observers have any questions, I know this is a very short break, just 5 minutes, but if you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat and I will address those either now or after the class. So feel free to add any questions you may have to the chat. Okay, Stephanie. I see that you have a question here about being a first-time tutor, and I definitely will tell you that I was apprehensive at first too, and very, very nervous. I still remember my first time, so it was a very nerve-wracking thing for me as well. Some tips that I could give are definitely to number one, try to get as much information about who you're tutoring as possible. So just any information about their level, especially even their interest. So if you can find and know things that they are interested in beforehand, this can really help you tailor your lessons, not only to be effective in teaching them the language or teaching them the particular aspects they're looking to learn, but it can also, I should say, it can also just make them more interested. So if we learn things in a way that is also piques our interest. So I can learn English and talk about sports, or I can learn English and talk about the weather. So if you can do that and keep their interest in that, that's something that you could do to prepare. And also in preparation, just making sure to have a plan. So what I did my first time is I definitely over prepared. So if you know you're tutoring for a half hour, you know, plan stuff for 45 minutes. Just because the worst thing that can happen, especially your first time, because you already have so many nerves, is to draw a blank or all of a sudden you've gone through your entire presentation or your entire session and you're all the information you thought you were going to present and you still have 15 minutes left. And so as you get more experience, you can probably work with that a little bit more and you'll learn ways that you can extend topics or bring up new topics in your lesson. But especially your first time, over prepare. Bring more information than you think you will need. Those would be my biggest tips. And I will address Emily here in a little bit. But first, let's get back to our class and our students. So, okay, how about let's start with our first one. Actually, I'm going to go in reverse order. And that's because I know, Claire, you already presented your open. So if we run out of time, I want to make sure I give Vicky and Emily a chance. So let's start with Vicky. You were doing scenario 3. So let's talk about yours. What do you have here?
Uh, for the opening meeting,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
it's pleasure to see everyone here, and good to see everyone here is safe. Uh, that's for opening.
yeah. Well, no, it's good to see everyone here. And that one would be one that I think you're kind of in the middle of both. That's really not too formal or too informal. You're kind of in the middle. So I think you would be okay saying that in both settings. That's pretty in the middle. Mhm. Okay,
Um,
continue.
change the sentence. So how about I want to informal way to opening meeting. It's pleasure to see everyone here.
Yeah, so that's a more formal way. It's a pleasure to see everyone here.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that would be more formal. And if you said something like "It's good to see you" or "Nice to see everyone," that would be more informal. Nice
Okay.
to see you, more informal. If you say "It's a pleasure to have you" or "It's an honor to have you," that's going to be more formal.
Okay. So will you use both or just one? Choose one.
Oh, you just choose one. So that's
Okay.
where you have the option. If you want to go more formal, then choose your formal and then continue that throughout your open. You want to just keep that formality since you chose formal. If you choose informal, then you have more liberty to go both ways and to go formal or informal. But formal may be a little unnatural if you're with a bunch of friends. We don't usually want to speak very formally if we're meeting with close friends or colleagues.
Okay.
Mhm.
So continue the next one.
Yeah, continue. Yeah.
And we are uh, also glad that the government allowed us to reopen the restaurant. restaurant. But we
Restaurant.
oh restaurant, sorry,
No, you're good.
restaurant. But we still have duty to protect you, your friend, and your family from getting COVID-19. So the following are the rules that everyone should follow. Okay, the first one, wear your mask while working. And secondly, we should keep the social distance until we all get vaccinated. Lastly, keep clean and use soap and hand sanitize often. We should still keep on high alert until everyone is safe. Thank you for your cooperation.
All right. Vicky, that was a good job. And I want to say for this one, your opening, you actually pretty much gave us a 2-minute summary of your entire meeting. So, but that's exactly what you want to do. So, I what I liked about what you just did was you hit a lot of those main points. You kicked us off and you welcomed us. You gave the objectives that, now the government is allowing the restaurant to reopen, but we still have additional responsibilities. And then you even went into what some of those responsibilities are. So as a informative meeting, since you're just giving information, you really didn't have to cover so much. Oh, when should you ask questions? What you did? Because you're just going to give all the information. And it sounds like this was a more, you started off a little bit informal but we switched to formal. So depending on who this meeting is with, you may want to do some of the other items that are open, but that open was good. You hit the main things you should cover. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Now, yeah. And how about Emily? You were doing scenario two. Would you like to give us the what you wrote for scenario two, a quick open?
Okay. I choose the informal
Okay.
way to have a problem solving meeting. Okay, let's start. Hi everyone, it's nice to have you. Let's get started. There are 2 points for today's meeting. Has anyone got a copy of the agenda? Okay, so let's keep this meeting to only 1 hour because we want to solve the problem today. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to ask.
Okay. All right. All right. So, um, here, what I think that you did well are you did hit your points, and you did a very good job of doing. You included a time to answer the questions or to ask questions. You included that in your opening, which I liked. The one thing though that I would say you did tell us that we're here to solve the problem. So you did mention that, and that is our main objective. But I didn't hear what the problem was. And I didn't hear sort of why we need help with the problem. So in our scenario number two, and I know we're a little bit over class, but I'll wrap up. In our scenario number two, we were speaking about a lack of funding for science equipment. So that's something that you should say in your meeting as the objective. So you could say, we're here, as many of you may know, we are short with funding to supply new equipment for our science labs. And we need help to try to figure out a solution of how we can secure funding to get new science equipment. And so that's just one thing that you could do. You did tell us we're here to solve a problem, but we just need to know what our problem is. And how you need and why you need our help or how we should help you. And so again, in the example that I just gave, I said we need your help to figure out a way to secure funding. So that lets your audience know, okay, as we talk, I should be trying to think about ways that we can get money. How can we raise money? What events can we hold? Can we sell raffle tickets? What can we do to get money? And that gets your audience thinking about that. Okay. Yeah, good job. So, Claire, I know you didn't get to share your second time around, but there will be plenty more opportunities. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. For the participants in the class, make sure to check Google Classroom. I did post another assignment. For this next week, we're going to take a look at creating an agenda. Okay, so we mentioned in our meeting that the agenda is very important. This will be an assignment that I will grade in Google Classroom. So make sure to turn that into me because I'll give you comments and edits for your agenda. But it won't be something that we necessarily go through in class. So make sure to turn it into me if you would like to get feedback on your agenda. And there is also an article to read that gives you some tips and tricks to make the perfect agenda. So make sure to read that, and then I will see everyone next week.
Bye bye.
All
Thank
right, bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye. Mhm.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.